She said it with her back turned, facing the window, arms crossed so tightly that her shoulders shook. I don't think she meant to say it out loud. Maybe it slipped out, cracked from the pressure she held in her throat for too long. Her voice wasn't trembling, but something in it made me stop mid-step, mug of coffee still warm in my hand, now forgotten. In here I can't afford to break down. I stood there, invisible like I often was, somewhere between necessary and unnoticed. It wasn't my place to speak. But there was something about the way she said it, like someone who had held her breath for years and finally exhaled. So I answered, simply, "With me you can be yourself." She turned slowly. Her eyes were glossy, but her expression was composed. She didn't say anything at first, just studied me like I'd spoken in another language. I didn't repeat myself. I didn't fill the silence. I let it settle between us like soft dust on forgotten furniture. Rebecca wasn't the kind of person who let people in. She led our team like a soldier, precise, commanding, always composed. I'd seen senior partners avoid crossing her and junior analysts nearly tremble under her gaze. But there, in that quiet moment before the rest of the office filled with sound, I saw something different. It wasn't weakness. It was weight. The kind people carry for too long without rest. I placed the coffee on the edge of her desk and left. I didn't look back. Not because I didn't want to, but because some things only grow when left alone. The rest of the day unfolded normally. Meetings, deadlines, numbers, plans. She didn't mention the morning. Neither did I. But something had shifted. An invisible thread tied between two people who had never really spoken before. The next day, I arrived earlier than usual, left a glass of water by her computer with a sticky note that read, "Stay hydrated. You're not made of steel." It wasn't a joke, just truth disguised as lightness. I didn't sign it. She'd know. She didn't thank me. But the glass was empty by noon, and the note was gone. We didn't change overnight. Our roles stayed the same. I did my work. She led the team. But sometimes when she spoke in meetings, her eyes would flicker toward me for half a second longer than necessary, like searching for ground. And I stayed that ground, not because I expected anything, not because I wanted to be noticed, but because I knew what it was like to carry too much alone. There's a stillness in people who have been strong for too long. It hums beneath their words, sharpens their movements, makes them efficient but tired in a way they can't name. Rebecca had that stillness, and maybe, in some quiet corner of her life, she needed someone not to rescue her, not to fix her, but just to stay. I never asked what made her say those words that morning. I didn't need to. Sometimes, the why doesn't matter. Only the fact that someone hears you and doesn't walk away. That day, I heard her, and I stayed. She started arriving earlier after that. Not much, 15, 20 minutes maybe. But it was enough to shift the rhythm. Enough for me to notice that her office door, usually closed tight, now stayed ajar. Enough to see her pause at my desk once or twice in passing, never saying much, but leaving behind a silence that meant something. I never tried to fill that space. Some people unfold only when they feel unseen. Rebecca was one of them. She didn't open like a flower, all color and bloom. She unwrapped slowly, like something tucked away for years, creased at the edges. The day after I left the glass and the note, she called me into her office for a routine update. It was nothing unusual, a quarterly projection review, minor adjustments to the growth model, but as I spoke, she watched me in that same way she had when I'd first replied to her, as if waiting for me to say something else, something not in the slides. I didn't, but when I finished, she said, "Thank you for the water." It was so quiet, I almost missed it. Her voice didn't soften, her posture didn't change, but her eyes did. They rested on mine just a little longer than they had to, and in them there was something I hadn't seen before. Not warmth, not yet, but permission. From that point on, it became a ritual. Some days it was water, other days, coffee. Once, a small packet of almonds with a note. "Eat something before 4 p.m. Numbers need brains." She didn't reply. But a week later, she left a post-it on my keyboard. "Brains appreciated." That was the first time I laughed at work in months. No one else seemed to notice the shift. Rebecca still held the same tone in meetings, the same command, the same high standards. But when things ran late, She started walking by my desk instead of retreating to her office. Not to talk, just to be near. She'd stand there a moment, breathing slower than usual, sometimes asking, "You're staying late again?" And I'd answer with a nod or a quiet, "Just wrapping up." She never told me to go home, but once she left a granola bar beside my mouse and said, "Don't skip meals just to impress me." I wanted to tell her I wasn't trying to impress anyone, but I think she already knew. We began finding each other in the small spaces work left behind, between meetings, during coffee runs, waiting for elevators. Our conversations weren't deep, not yet, but they carried weight in their simplicity. I remember one afternoon, the air heavy with deadlines, she asked, "Do you ever feel like none of this stops? Like even when you're home, you're still here?" I nodded. All the time. She didn't reply, but I saw the way her shoulders dropped, just slightly, like someone had handed her something she didn't know she needed, a shared truth, not a solution. We never lingered. That was part of the unspoken agreement. We didn't reach too far. But slowly we became part of each other's landscape. A nod across the room, a pause before a storm, the quiet sense that if everything else cracked, this wouldn't. And in that stillness, something started to form. Not a relationship, not yet, but a refuge. A place where neither of us had to explain the weight we carried, only rest in the knowledge that someone else saw it and stayed anyway. It started with walks, short ones, just a block or two after lunch or between long meetings. She'd glance at me and say, "I need air," and I'd follow, never asking questions, never assuming it meant more than what it was. But somehow it always did. She didn't talk much during those first few walks. I matched her pace, kept quiet, and let the silence stretch. It wasn't awkward. It was the kind that fills in the gaps without needing to be explained. We'd pass the same storefronts, hear the same traffic hum, and return without fanfare. Then one day, she spoke. "I don't sleep well anymore," she said as we crossed the street. "Not since I took this position." I didn't look at her. I just nodded. Responsibility keeps the mind loud. She gave a short breath, not quite a laugh. "It's not the responsibility," she said. "It's the loneliness. People think leadership means admiration. Most days it just means silence." I looked over then. Her face was calm, but her hands were restless in her coat pockets. "You don't have to be alone in it," I said. Not a promise, just a truth. She didn't answer, but that night, she emailed me a spreadsheet at 11:42 p.m. with no comment, just the file. I wrote back, "Looks good. Sleep." The next day, we walked again, longer this time. She told me about her mother, how she used to rehearse conversations before family dinners to avoid saying the wrong thing, how every compliment came with a condition, how failure wasn't just frowned upon, it was feared. "And now I live like that," she said. "As if everyone's just waiting for me to mess up." "They're not," I said. She looked at me with a kind of fatigue that had nothing to do with work hours. "How would you know?" "Because I'm watching you lead people who don't even realize they're learning." It was the first time she looked away. We walked in silence again after that, but it felt different. Not distant, just full. Somewhere in those pauses, a kind of rhythm emerged between us. She'd bring 2 coffees some mornings, placing one on my desk without a word. I'd leave folded notes inside her reports. "You handled that meeting better than they deserved. Breathe. The world won't end today. I see you." She never acknowledged them, but she kept them. I noticed her drawer one evening when she left it open by accident. My notes, stacked neatly in a small clip. She saw me notice. Didn't say a word. Just closed the drawer slowly and held my gaze for a second longer than usual. We weren't friends in the conventional sense. We weren't anything defined, but we were beginning to understand each other in the spaces where words had always failed us. She once told me she hated the word vulnerable, said it sounded like a weakness wrapped in a compliment. I told her maybe it was just another word for being honest when it's hardest. She didn't argue, but she walked slower that day, closer. And when we reached the corner where we usually turned back, she didn't stop. She kept walking, and I followed. No questions, no assumptions, just 2 people moving forward, together. It was late when the last person left the office, the kind of late where even the vending machine hum sounds loud, and the city outside feels distant, unreachable. I stayed behind to finish a quarterly analysis. She stayed because she always did. Habit or necessity, I wasn't sure. The hum of keys and the occasional sigh were the only sounds between us. Then, without warning, she said, "Do you think people become who they are because of pressure, or because of who they're trying not to become?" I looked up. She wasn't looking at me, just staring at her screen like the answer might be hidden between rows of data. "Both," I said. "I think some people are shaped by what they run from, others by what they're quietly chasing." She leaned back in her chair, eyes tired but sharp. "I don't know which one I am anymore." There was something in her voice, something that didn't belong in the mouth of someone as composed as Rebecca. It wasn't sadness, it was weariness dressed as curiosity. "You don't have to know tonight," I said. "It's okay not to have a conclusion." She glanced at me. "You always talk like that." "Like what? Like the world doesn't scare you?" I hesitated. "It does. I've just made peace with not controlling it." She looked away quickly, but I caught it, that flicker of something close to envy. "I used to think strength meant certainty," she said quietly. "Now I think it just means holding everything together long enough that no one else notices you're breaking." I stood then, walked over to her desk. Not too close, just enough. I leaned my palms on the edge of the wood and said calmly, "You don't need to hold it all together. Not with me." That time, she didn't turn away. We didn't speak for a while. She worked. I watched the way her fingers hovered over the keyboard, hesitating now and then like thoughts had to ask permission to be typed. When I sat back down, she asked, "Why do you stay late?" "Sometimes the quiet helps me think. Sometimes I don't want to go home just yet." She nodded. "Same." Eventually, the report was done. She printed a copy and handed it to me without comment. Our fingers brushed for the briefest moment, and it felt like an answer to a question neither of us had dared to ask. As we packed up, I noticed her slowing down. Not from fatigue, something else. Like she wasn't sure if she wanted the night to end. At the elevator, she turned to me. "Do you think I'm difficult to be around?" "No," I said. "Steady. I think you're carrying more than most people ever will, and still showing up." Her expression didn't change, but I saw it again, just behind her eyes. That quiet relief of someone who didn't expect to be understood and suddenly was. "I don't let people in," she said. "I know. Why are you still here?" I didn't hesitate. "Because I want to be." The elevator arrived. She stepped in, and I didn't follow. She looked at me one last time before the doors closed. No smile. Just presence. Just something unspoken that would stay with me long after I left the building. And in that silence, something shifted again. Not a declaration, just a door that hadn't closed. There were moments, after that night, when the air between us felt different. Not heavier, quieter maybe. As if something had finally been acknowledged, even if it hadn't been named. We didn't talk about the elevator. We didn't talk about what was almost said. But something stayed. It followed us through reports, briefings, quiet walks, and the pauses we no longer avoided. She began standing closer during meetings, not enough to be noticed by others, but enough that I felt the weight of her presence more clearly. There was no performance in it, just the quiet instinct of someone leaning toward safety without realizing it. One afternoon, as the team filtered out for lunch, she lingered by my desk. "Walk with me," she asked. Not a command, a question. That was new. We walked slowly. The city moved around us, loud and unaware. We didn't speak for the first block. Then, without turning to me, she said, "I keep thinking about what you said, that I don't have to hold it all together with you." I nodded, letting her keep the silence as long as she needed. "I'm not used to being given that kind of permission," she continued. "Usually, people need me to be the fixed point, the one who doesn't flinch. Then maybe you've been surrounded by the wrong people." She gave a short laugh. "Or maybe I made it too easy for them to expect that." There was a bench near the corner where we usually turned back. She stopped and sat. I followed, careful not to speak too soon. Her hands were clasped in her lap, tense. "When I was younger," she said, "I thought love looked like proving yourself, showing you could endure, that if you were strong enough, people wouldn't leave." I said nothing, just listened. "But now I think maybe people stay when they feel chosen, not impressed, not obligated, just seen." She looked at me then, not searching, just seeing. "You make it feel easy," she said. "I don't think it has to be hard." She was quiet for a long time. Then she asked, "Are you always this steady?" "No," I said. "But I don't let the storms decide who I am." She nodded slowly, as if letting the words settle somewhere deep. We sat there until the wind picked up. When we walked back, she didn't keep distance like before. Her shoulder brushed mine once or twice, and she didn't move away. That evening I stayed late again, not because I had to, because I knew she would. And when she walked past my desk, she paused. "Want to stay for tea?" she asked. We drank in her office. The lights dimmed, the city dark beyond the glass. No talk of reports or timelines. Just quiet stories, half-finished ones from childhood. A memory of a dog she lost at 16. The way her father used to hum when he worked on their broken sink even though he never fixed it. When I stood to leave, she followed me to the door, not with urgency, just presence. "Thank you," she said. "For what?" "For making the silence feel like something safe." And as I walked away, I realized I wasn't carrying her story. I was simply being allowed inside it, one step at a time. The morning started like any other. Coffee, emails, half-spoken greetings. But the pressure was thick in the air. There was a quarterly review scheduled with one of our most difficult clients, and I could see it in Rebecca's shoulders before she even said a word. She didn't bark orders, didn't raise her voice, but everything about her was sharper. Her movements clipped, her words trimmed of anything unnecessary. When the meeting began, the client came in swinging, passive-aggressive remarks, interruptions, and an underlying condescension that targeted her with precision. I watched as she held herself upright, calm, poised, but I saw it, that flicker of something fraying behind her composed exterior. Her fingers curled slightly against the notepad, knuckles whitening just so. I didn't speak much. She didn't need saving. She needed space to breathe. I waited, gave input when asked, and held my ground quietly when challenged. But I stayed near, not physically, but in presence. The meeting ended with polite nods and a slew of unresolved tension. When the door closed, Rebecca stood still, eyes fixed on the conference table. Then, suddenly, she snapped. "Everyone out," she said, voice low but sharp. "I need the room." The others filed out in uneasy silence. I lingered. She didn't look at me, just clenched her jaw and turned her back. I waited. I wasn't sure if I should stay, but I couldn't leave either. After a long moment, she whispered, "He talked to me like I was ornamental." "He did," I said, softly. Her breath hitched, and I let him. "No, you didn't. You stayed composed." "That's not the same as being silent." She turned then, eyes glossy but unreadable. "Why do I let people like that get to me?" "Because you're human, not stone." She sat abruptly, elbows on the table, hands over her face. "I can't afford to lose control, not in this place." I stepped forward slowly. "Do you want me to go?" "No," she said. Her voice cracked on that single syllable. "Just stay." So I closed the door. I didn't say anything. I didn't move toward her. I just sat at the far end of the table and let the silence settle between us like a shared blanket. She stayed like that for a long time, unmoving, as if holding herself together through sheer will. When she finally spoke, her voice was so small, I almost didn't catch it. Sometimes I wonder if I'm only valuable when I'm invulnerable. "You're valuable because you care more than most people can handle." She dropped her hands slowly, looking at me. "You always see past the armor. I don't need the armor to understand who you are." She exhaled, a sound closer to grief than relief. "You make it hard to pretend. Then stop pretending." For a long time, she didn't move. Then she leaned back, eyes closed, and whispered, "Don't go." I stayed. We didn't talk about strategy or numbers. We didn't dissect the meeting. We just sat, two people in a quiet room, the echo of too many expectations finally softening. She didn't thank me. She didn't have to. In that moment, I wasn't her employee. She wasn't my superior. We were just two people, bruised by different things, finding shelter in the same silence. She didn't come in for 3 days. No email, no message, no forwarding instructions. Just silence. It wasn't like her. Rebecca wasn't the type to vanish, even when the world collapsed around her. If anything, She clung to routine like it was armor. That's how I knew something was wrong. On the fourth day, I left the office early, picked up a small container of soup from the cafe down the street. Chicken and rice. Nothing fancy. Something warm. Something that didn't ask much. I didn't call ahead. I just walked. Her building was older, quiet, tucked between two larger ones that blocked most of the light. I'd never been there, never asked. But she'd mentioned it once in passing. Enough for me to remember. When I reached her door, I hesitated. Then I knocked. It took a while, long enough for me to wonder if I'd made a mistake. Then I heard her footsteps. Slow, careful. She opened the door just a little. No makeup. Hair pulled back loosely. A sweatshirt I didn't recognize. Her eyes were puffy, not just tired, worn. I lifted the bag. I brought soup. She blinked, didn't move, then stepped aside. The apartment was small but clean, lived in. A stack of unread books near the couch, a blanket folded too neatly. No signs of chaos, just a stillness that felt too heavy. I wasn't sure you'd want to see anyone, I said, setting the bag on the counter. I don't, she said. Then, softer. But you're not just anyone. I didn't touch that, just opened the container, poured the soup into a bowl I found in her cabinet. She sat at the table, watching me like she wasn't sure if she should speak or cry. I didn't know how to explain, she said after a while. Monday morning I woke up and I just couldn't. Not because I was sick. Not really. Just empty. You don't have to explain. But I want to. Her voice cracked. I've spent my whole life proving I'm unshakable, and then I wake up one day and can't even get out of bed without a reason. Maybe that's the proof you needed, that even the strongest need rest. She looked down at her hands. I was afraid if I stopped, everything would fall apart. It didn't. Not yet. I sat across from her, elbows on the table, my presence the only answer I could offer. She ate slowly, quietly, half the bowl, then pushed it aside. I used to believe needing someone meant weakness, she said, but now I think not allowing anyone in, that's the lonelier kind of fragile. I nodded. How you let me in? I didn't mean to. I know. She looked at me, really looked, like she was trying to memorize the shape of the moment. You didn't ask why I disappeared. No. I figured when you were ready, you'd tell me. And if I wasn't, I still would have shown up. She smiled then. Barely, but it was real. I didn't stay long. I didn't try to make the moment more than it was. But as I stood to leave, she reached out, touched my wrist lightly. Thank you for not needing me to be okay. I didn't answer, just held her gaze. Long enough for her to know she wasn't invisible in her unraveling. Then I left, knowing something had shifted again, not loudly, not dramatically, just enough. We returned to normal after that. Or something that resembled it. She came back to the office on a Wednesday, quiet but steady. No announcement, no excuses. Just a silent nod in the hallway as if to say, I'm still here. I nodded back. That was enough. But something in her had softened, even if she tried not to show it. The edges weren't as sharp. She listened longer in meetings, didn't interrupt as quickly. Once, I caught her watching the rest of the team through the glass wall of the conference room, eyes distant. When she noticed me looking, she didn't glance away. She just held the stare for a moment, then looked down at her notes. I understood. That Friday, she asked if I wanted to grab coffee after work. Not with the team, not with a group, just us. No excuse offered. None needed. We walked in silence for a few blocks, before settling into a quiet place on a side street. It was dim, unhurried, filled with the smell of ground beans and old books. She picked the table in the corner, sat down across from me like she'd been there 100 times before, though I knew she hadn't. I'm not used to this, she said, stirring her coffee though she hadn't added anything to it. To what? This, sitting without a reason, being seen without being assessed. I leaned back. You're allowed to exist without performing. She gave a tired smile. You keep saying things like that like they're simple? They are. We're just taught they shouldn't be. She nodded slowly, her gaze falling to the table. When I was a kid, my mother used to tell me I had to be the best because being enough wasn't safe. She used to say, you'll be tolerated or you'll be exceptional, nothing in between. I think I started confusing love with approval around the same time. I said nothing, just listened. And every time someone left, she continued, I assumed it was because I'd stopped impressing them. I leaned forward. That's not love. That's survival. She looked up. Her eyes didn't shine like they usually did. They held something raw, something unguarded. You don't treat me like I'm impressive, she said. No, I treat you like you matter. She went still. Then, very quietly, she asked, What do you see when you look at me? I took a breath, answered without flinching. I see someone who leads with more pressure than support, who's been told strength means silence, and who's still trying to be gentle in a world that keeps asking her to be harder. I see someone generous, even when she's afraid to be. Her lips parted slightly. She didn't blink. No one's ever said that to me, she whispered. I'm not saying it to impress you. I'm saying it because it's true. She looked down, pressing her palm flat to the table like she needed to ground herself. I keep expecting you to need something, she said. I don't. Why? Because I already decided to stay. The silence between us stretched, but it wasn't empty. It was full of something that hadn't existed before, a shared knowing, a recognition. She didn't cry. She didn't thank me. She just sat there, fully present. And for someone who had lived so much of her life under the weight of performance, I knew what a miracle that was. It was a Sunday when I texted her, just a few words. Want to get some air later? Nothing urgent. Just a walk. She replied almost an hour later. Where? I picked the park near the edge of the city, the one with uneven trails and too many trees, where nothing was polished or intentional. It was quiet there, quiet in the way people like us needed. She arrived just after 3, no makeup, no blazer, just a soft grey sweater, sleeves pushed to her elbows, and a small frown like she wasn't sure if she should be doing this. You didn't say what this was, she said. It's nothing, I replied. Or maybe it's something, either way we can just walk. We didn't talk much at first. Leaves crunched under our steps, and the wind moved gently through the trees like a language that asked nothing. She kept pace beside me, arms crossed loosely, head slightly down. Not guarded, just feeling. After a while she said, I used to come to places like this as a kid. When my parents fought, I'd ride my bike to the end of the street and sit in the grass. I thought if I stayed still enough, the noise at home would forget me. I nodded, not filling the space. I still do that, she added. Only now I call it working late. There was no bitterness in her voice, just honesty. I stopped by a quiet clearing and sat on the edge of a slope. She hesitated, then joined me. You ever feel like you're waiting for your life to start? She asked. Even while you're living it? All the time, I said. She looked over at me, her expression unreadable. And what are you waiting for? I didn't answer right away. Then I said, moments like this, maybe. Ones that don't look like anything, but feel like something important just happened. She looked away quickly, but not because she was retreating, because something had landed. She pulled her knees up to her chest, rested her chin there. Do you think I'm hard to be with? No, I said. I think you're used to being alone in rooms full of people. That changes how you sit with someone who actually stays. She closed her eyes for a long moment. I've spent years building a life I thought would protect me, she whispered. But all it did was keep people out. You're allowed to open the door now. And what if no one stays? I'm here, aren't I? She didn't speak again for a while. We just sat. I passed her a piece of fruit from my pocket, and she took it without looking. A simple act. But I felt it settle between us like a promise. When the sun started to fall behind the trees, she said, This is the first time in months I haven't felt like I was about to fall apart. Then we'll come back here, I said, as often as you need. She nodded once, slowly. When we stood to leave, she didn't walk ahead. She stayed beside me the whole way. Our arms brushed once. Neither of us moved away. She came to my desk late in the afternoon, when the floor had quieted and the light had turned soft against the windows. She didn't speak right away, just stood there, her arms crossed loosely, her gaze not on me, but somewhere further away, as if trying to decide whether this moment was real or something imagined. I had a rough call, she said. My mother. I closed my laptop. Want to sit? She didn't move. She said I should start thinking about settling down, that I'm not getting any younger, that being respected won't matter when I'm alone. I waited. I didn't tell her that I already feel more whole now than I did when I was trying to fit into all the boxes she drew for me, she said. I didn't tell her about you. I kept still, not for fear, just reverence. Some moments needed silence to stay intact. She finally met my eyes. Do you think it's strange how fast this has happened? No, I said. I think some things just start when they're ready. She took a slow breath. I don't know what to do with this, with someone who doesn't demand anything from me, who doesn't shrink when I'm sharp, who doesn't chase or retreat, just stays. I stood, gently. Rebecca, I said, you don't have to do anything. She swallowed. That's what terrifies me. I stepped closer, not to close the space, but to hold it steady. You said something once, I told her. In here I can't afford to break down. I haven't forgotten. Her lips pressed together, and for a second I thought she might turn away, but she didn't. And I meant it, she said. This place, this life, there's no room for softness. With them, I said. Not with me. She didn't move, but something shifted in her posture. Her breath came slower. With me, you can be yourself. The words hung in the air, unadorned. I didn't dress them in sentiment. I didn't reach for her. I just let them be what they were, an offering. She sat down at the edge of my desk, hands in her lap. I never realized how exhausting it was, trying to be acceptable all the time. Then stop. She looked at me, really looked, as if searching for the catch. There wasn't one. I'm afraid, she said quietly, that if I let myself need this, need you, I won't know how to be without it. You won't have to be, I said. But if you ever are, you'll still be whole. Something in her broke, not into pieces, but into truth. Her shoulders dropped. Her face softened. Her silence wasn't defensive anymore. It was shelter. Okay, she said, just that. We didn't embrace. We didn't make promises. But the moment held everything. And as she sat there, quiet and unguarded, I felt it. Not an ending, not a climax, but a beginning that didn't need to announce itself. Something had started. Quietly, steadily, and neither of us looked away.